Retweeting from Britain first was the wrong thing to do.
Disturbing retweets from Donald Trump threatening the relationship between the United Kingdom and the US. Hello again, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is the World News from Al Jazeera. A call for action as Pope Francis urges the international community to take decisive measures to resolve the Rohingya refugee crisis. North Korea shows off its latest ballistic missile launch as international calls for tighter sanctions grow louder. And it's safe to say goodbye. The way is cleared for tourists to leave an Indonesian island threatened by a volcano. So, we're going to begin with these new tensions between the US and the UK. The British Prime Minister Theresa May says she is fully focused on tackling extremism. That is in response to the tweet from Donald Trump telling her to focus on, quote, destructive radical Islamic terrorism. All this back and forth began when Theresa May condemned Donald Trump for his anti-Islam retweets. And then just a few minutes ago, she reiterated her disdain for Donald Trump's actions.
But the fact that we work together does not mean that we're afraid to say when we think the United States have got it wrong, and to be very clear with them. And I'm very clear that retweeting from Britain first was the wrong thing to do. British Muslims are peaceful and law-abiding people who have themselves been the subject of acts and the victims of acts of terror by the far right. There are those who conduct acts of terror in the name of Islam, but it is not in the name of Islam. And as Prime Minister, I am very clear about the priority that I give to dealing with the challenge of the threat of terrorism, and that's dealing with the threat of terrorism and extremism from whatever source they come.
Barnaby Phillips in London with more on this one. You can hear the frustration in Theresa May's voice, can't you? She's in Amman, Jordan. She wants to talk about UK relationships with Middle East countries, and this retweet controversy won't leave her alone.
Exactly. She's desperately trying to forge a new role for Britain in a post-Brexit world. She's dealing with very delicate diplomatic issues in the Middle East. She's been in Iraq. She's been in Saudi Arabia. But this issue of Donald Trump is overshadowing her visit. The line from the British government is this, that the special relationship between these two countries dates back many decades. It is a diplomatic, military, cultural, intellectual relationship that is much deeper and much more significant than the mere relationship between a current incumbent of the White House, if you like. Speaking a short time ago here in the House of Commons, Amber Rudd, she's the Home Secretary, argued that when she sees, for example, how Britain and the United States share intelligence, she is aware of just how important those ties are, how many lives are saved, but at the same time, Britain is not afraid to call the United States out if necessary.
I think that it is fair to say that we have been very clear. President Donald Trump was wrong to retweet videos posted by the FAR group Britain First. We have said so clearly in this House, and the Prime Minister has said so clearly online. We will continue to speak freely and frankly when it takes place.
Barnaby, there is the prospect of a visit by Donald Trump to the UK at some point. Theresa May made that offer a while ago. What's your thoughts on whether that still stands or not?
Well, Theresa May was asked about that in Amman just a few moments ago, as the government has been asked here in London again today, and the official line is this. The invitation was extended, it has been accepted. Therefore, de facto, the visit is still on in theory. In practice, Kamal, I can't see it happening anytime soon. There has been such an extraordinary chorus of condemnation and anger, not just from the opposition Labour Party, not just from civil society, not just from Muslim and indeed Anglican leaders here in the United Kingdom, but from within the governing Conservative Party, that the prospect of that visit is extremely awkward and embarrassing for Theresa May. Remember, a state visit, full bells and whistles, carriage down the mile, dragging the Queen into it, all the rest of it. One hesitates to make assumptions about what's going through Theresa May's mind, but I think it's reasonable to speculate that she is regretting having made that invitation back in January.
All right, Barnaby Phillips in London, thank you. Prime Minister May also expressed her concerns in that news conference in Amman about the crisis in Yemen caused by the Saudi-led blockade.
Today, almost a third of Yemen's entire population is at risk of deep food insecurity. This dire situation must end. The UK will work with our partners to do everything possible to achieve this. We will continue as the third largest humanitarian donor to the crisis in Yemen, increasing our contribution to £155 million for 2017-18 and pressing the whole international community to do more. But I'm also clear that the flow of commercial supplies on which the country depends must be resumed if we are to avoid a humanitarian catastrophe.
Meanwhile, medical sources say at least 10 people have been killed in fighting in Yemen's capital, Sana'a. Forces loyal to the former president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, fought with the Houthi rebels near the Al Saleh Mosque. The Saleh loyalists accuse the Houthis of committing a coup. The groups have a loose alliance. Now, the head of the Roman Catholic Church has called on the international community to take what he calls decisive measures to resolve the refugee crisis in Bangladesh and Myanmar. But, once again, he did not use the word Rohingya. Pope Francis is now in Bangladesh, where more than 600,000 Rohingya have fled after a military crackdown began in August in Myanmar. The pontiff was criticised for not publicly mentioning the Rohingya crisis during the Myanmar leg of his trip. He also avoided the word in an address in Bangladesh's capital, Dhaka, instead speaking of, quote, the refugees from Rakhine State.
It is imperative that the international community take decisive measures to address this grave crisis. We need to work to resolve the political problems that is causing these people to suffer, and also to offer immediate material assistance to Bangladesh to respond to those who urgently need it.
The US is calling for more sanctions and the complete isolation of North Korea after another ballistic missile test. The United Nations Security Council has held an emergency meeting following Pyongyang's latest launch. North Korea says the test proves it has the capability to hit the US mainland. Kathy Novak with more from Seoul.
Following the latest in a series of ballistic missile launches, North Korea says its rocket weaponry system development is complete and it's finally a nuclear state. The day after firing what the North says is its most advanced intercontinental ballistic missile yet, state TV showed leader Kim Jong-un overseeing the nighttime test. The U.S. president again called Kim Little Rocket Man and added a new unflattering description.
Little Rocket Man, rocket fuel for the American economy. He is a sick puppy.
For the 9th time this year, the United Nations Security Council discussed yet another crisis centered on North Korea.
This test is another confirmation that the North Korean threat has changed dramatically in a few months, both in scope and scale. The threat has shifted from being regional to global.
And from the U.S. ambassador, a direct plea to China to exert greater economic pressure on its ally and neighbor.
We need China to do more. President Trump called Chinese President Xi this morning and told him that we have come to the point that China must cut off the oil from North Korea. That would be a pivotal step in the world's effort to stop this international pariah.
But no such pledge from China. Instead, it called again on the U.S. to explore a freeze-for-freeze scenario in which North Korea would slow its missile program if the U.S. and South Korea lowered their military posture on the peninsula. This position supported by Russia.
We proposed a solution based along the principle of suspension for suspension, which envisions the DPRK stopping missile tests while at the same time the US and South Korea decreasing the scale of their military exercises. This in turn will pave the way for the principles of peaceful coexistence and peaceful discussions between Washington and Pyongyang.
But this has been repeatedly and vehemently ruled out by the US. Another round of joint exercises between the U.S. and South Korean military forces are due to start here next week. North Korea has said the drills are a rehearsal for war. At the United Nations, America's ambassador has said the U.S. doesn't seek war, but if it does start, North Korea's leaders would be, in her words, utterly destroyed. Kathy Novak, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
Pakistan's government is facing criticism for the way it handled protests against a minister who was accused of blasphemy. 5 people were killed in those demonstrations that ended with the resignation of the minister. The government says agreeing to the protesters' demands was the only way to prevent more violence. Zain Basravi with this report from Lahore.
It's been a tough year for Pakistan Muslim League Noon, the country's ruling party. Nawaz Sharif was removed as prime minister over corruption allegations, and now the government is accused of mishandling a sit-in in Islamabad by religious hardliners that ended only when the government gave in to their demands. It's the kind of appeasement, their opponents say, that means PMLN has lost the moral authority to rule. But at a party office in Lahore, it's business as usual. Muhammad Pervez Malik has represented his constituency for nearly 2 decades. He's also the Minister for Commerce and Textile. When asked about whether his government should step aside, he said breaking people down doesn't help build the country up.
But it is really unfair of going and creating violence for these kind of things. That would definitely damage your country's not only image but performance also. So I think we should all avoid this kind of thing, and negotiations and talking to each other is the best course.
He also said while Islamic groups are great at orchestrating large rallies, when it comes to the business of governing, voters pick established parties that know how to get things done. He points to projects like this one, a vocational training center for women completed in 2015. It offers a variety of free and subsidized professional courses, all designed to help women enter the workforce.
In addition to studies, skills are also very important for girls. Even if you have 10 master's degrees, you can't guarantee you'll get a job. But if you have this 2-year diploma, you can be confident of finding work.
While religious parties focus on the spiritual side of life, PMLN has established its reputation on brick-and-mortar projects like these that help improve people's daily lives. And that's what ruling party leaders say will keep them popular at the polling booth. Hospitals, roads, bridges, community centers. Large infrastructure projects are what many voters think of when they think of PMLN. But a series of political challenges has taken a toll on the party's public image.
I think this government's a total flop.
All my life, I've voted for the Muslim League Noon, but Nawaz Sharif is in and out of court these days. How can we vote for a guy like that?
Not everyone feels the same way.
Look, during the previous administration, Nawaz Sharif tore mountains apart to build the motorway between Islamabad and Lahore. During this administration, he built 5 power plants, and he started a motorway between Lahore and Karachi. So God willing, in the 2018 election, PMLN will win again.
For party stalwarts like this, for whom the former prime minister is the man who moved mountains, shaking their faith won't be easy. Zain Basravi, Al Jazeera, Lahore.
Here's what's coming up for you on Al Jazeera. With living conditions already dire, Syrians are facing a new threat for survival as winter sets in. And European Union and African leaders pledge to do more to help thousands of migrants stranded in Libya. You're back with Al Jazeera. These are the top stories. Tension between the US and the UK as British Prime Minister Theresa May again condemns President Donald Trump for retweeting anti-Muslim videos. Trump responded to May herself by telling her to focus on destructive radical Islamic terrorism. May insists she is fully focused on tackling extremism. Pope Francis has called on the international community to take decisive measures to resolve the refugee crisis in Bangladesh and Myanmar. Didn't use the word Rohingya, though. The pontiff instead referred to the refugees from Rakhine State during an address in Dhaka. And the US is calling for more sanctions and the complete isolation of North Korea. The United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting following Pyongyang's missile test on Tuesday. North Korea says the launch proves it has the capability to hit the US mainland. Syria's opposition is meeting the UN mediator Staffan de Mistura in Geneva in the 8th round of United Nations-sponsored talks to end the civil war. Discussions are happening as rebels trying to topple Syria's President Bashar al-Assad face up to being significantly weakened by nearly 7 years of fighting. Syrian government negotiators held talks with de Mistura on Wednesday. Our diplomatic editor James Bays with more now from Geneva.
Here at UN headquarters in Geneva, reporters have been waiting outside amid flurries of snow, watching the comings and goings of the various delegations. And for the first time in this round of talks, in fact for the first time for several years, we've had both the opposition and the government in the building at the same time. We understand they're having what's known as proximity talks. That's the two delegations in adjacent rooms, and the Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura has been going between those rooms, passing information. We understand at this stage they're talking about some principles for the ongoing talks in this round, which are supposed to, according to the Special Envoy, focus on a new constitution for Syria and also for UN-supervised elections. They're not talking about any political transition and who should run the country during that transition, and that certainly is what the opposition want to focus on rather than those other matters.
Winter approaching in Syria as well, and many in the north of the country worry about how they will actually survive. There is a lack of fuel, and people living in besieged areas say they've already used most of the trees around them for firewood. Osama bin Javed reports now from Gaziantep on the Turkey-Syria border.
It's getting cold in Syria, and for Ala, it's the time of the year to scavenge for things to burn. They need it more in winter because in addition to cooking, the family will need to stay warm.
We came from Homs city. Because of the government, we didn't go to Idlib. I send my boy to collect things to burn. We're going to face another winter without any food, firewood or diesel.
Diesel is expensive and in short supply because the northern countryside of Homs has been under siege for years.
The reason behind the high prices is the blockade we live under. Even then, the diesel we get from the regime areas is not suitable for cars.
People are forced to look for alternatives. Jihad's become a tree logger. He fells all kinds of trees in his own and nearby villages. Just this year, he says he has cut 60 tons of trees to be burnt as firewood. The cost to the environment seems a small price to pay for survival.
High diesel prices make us cut the trees down. It used to cost less than 2 cents a kilo. Now it's over 20 cents.
But cheaper alternatives to diesel means trees in these villages are fast disappearing.
There aren't enough trees left. We have been besieged for the last 5 years. When the firewood ends, we'll have just our clothes and God's help.
Some residents of Al Hula are trying to find alternatives to cutting trees. Hassan tries growing them to earn a meager living. Back in Allah's home, they survive on whatever they can get their hands on to cook with and to cook on.
I can't go to school. I used to like winter, but there is no money to buy firewood or diesel.
Allah and other children hope winter will be easy on them this year. Al Hula is just one of many besieged areas in Syria where tens of thousands of people are struggling to survive. This will be their 7th winter since the 2011 uprising, and many Syrians say that the outside world does nothing to ease their suffering. Osama bin Javed, Al Jazeera, Gaziantep.
Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani has received an invitation to attend next month's Gulf Cooperation Council Summit in Kuwait. There have been doubts about whether that GCC meeting would even go ahead, but Kuwait has confirmed it will. The Kuwaiti Emir, Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Jabir Al Sabah, sent the invitation. Remember, he has been acting as mediator after 4 Arab countries cut their ties with Qatar and imposed a blockade in June. The handover of power in Gaza has been postponed. Rival Palestinian factions Hamas and Fatah did agree to ask Egypt for that delay. Hamas was due to transfer power of the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority by Friday as part of a reconciliation deal, but it's asking for a new deadline of December the 10th to, quote, complete arrangements. Both sides accuse each other of not respecting the deal. The mediator, though, Egypt, has sent a delegation to Gaza to try to resolve it. Leaders in Libya have agreed to the emergency repatriation of refugees and migrants facing abuse in detention camps. The scandal was a big topic at a summit of EU and African Union leaders in Ivory Coast. The announcement by French President Emmanuel Macron follows an outcry over a video apparently showing African migrants being sold as slaves in Libya. Natasha Butler reporting now from the summit in Abidjan.
Well, at the end of this summit, we are expecting a joint statement by European and African leaders that will announce the creation of an anti-slavery task force. Now, what we understand is that this task force will be used to save and protect refugees as they travel along those migratory routes in Africa and in particular in Libya. It will also be used to speed up the voluntary return of refugees to their countries of origin and help identify possible asylum seekers. There is no doubt that the issue of slavery and migration, they've absolutely dominated the agenda here at this summit in Abidjan. But there is a lot of concern amongst those who say that perhaps the approach the leaders are taking is not the right one, that they are favouring quick fixes over long-term solution, and more needs to be done to really address the root causes of why people are leaving home in the first place.
Well, the new president of Zimbabwe has announced plans to revive the economy. Emmerson Mnangagwa is offering an amnesty to companies and people who return their money which is stashed in overseas bank accounts. He's hoping it'll ease some of the chronic cash shortages, but people are sceptical, as Hana Butasa reports now from Harare.
Zimbabwe's central bank says one bond note, the local currency, is worth $1. But on the black market, $100 is worth 120 bond notes. That's a 20% markup. It's one reason why some Zimbabweans don't deposit cash in banks anymore. Illegal cash transactions are big business for the syndicates who run them. This money changer asked us not to show his face. He says too many high-profile politicians and business leaders are benefiting from illegal cash transactions. He doubts Zimbabweans who are accused of breaking the exchange control law by illegally stashing money abroad will return their riches in exchange for amnesty.
Okay, people should return the money that they stole. Which people? I mean, these are people who had always been in the system. If we understand the president, the new president himself, he's always been in the system. And so have all his friends been in the system. And if the people who stole money, they stole money, they should return it to where? To who?
Zimbabwe's new leader says after February, anyone who hasn't returned money illegally stashed abroad will be arrested. Some economists say if money is returned, it could help ease the current cash crisis.
Some ministers were found with the cash in their residences. It's testimony that the money has been taken out. So the former amount of money from the former channel could be 3 billion and above. But if you then bring into account one smuggled through the briefcases and suitcases, we could be talking of quite an nominal high figure.
Emmerson Mnangagwa is also promising to cut unnecessary government spending. President Emmerson Mnangagwa is under pressure to deliver, especially on the economy. The unemployment rate is more than 90%. Banks sometimes fail to give cash to customers because of foreign currency shortages. Long queues outside banks are coming at the end of every month. Some customers wait the whole day only to receive $20 because of the withdrawal limit.
So waiting here for the whole day, which means we are delaying the production of our country. And the next thing, the companies will collapse.
Mnangagwa was sworn in as president on Saturday after Robert Mugabe resigned. Some Zimbabweans say they are cautiously optimistic he has a plan to revive the ailing economy. Hana Butasa, Al Jazeera, Harare.
Life sentences have been given to so-called death flight pilots from Argentina's military dictatorship. In the first judgments of the largest trial of its kind in Argentine history, 29 men were sentenced. They included former Navy Captain Alfredo Astiz, known as the Angel of Death. He worked at a notorious prison where opponents disappeared after torture, some of them thrown out of aircraft while still alive. 30,000 political opponents are thought to have been murdered between 1976 and 1983. Dutch investigators are trying to find out how a convicted war criminal managed to smuggle poison into court to commit suicide. Slobodan Praljak drank from the bottle seconds after hearing he'd lost his appeal of a 20-year prison sentence. The 72-year-old former commander of Bosnian Croat forces later died in hospital. Judges at The Hague upheld his conviction for atrocities committed in the 1990s. Thousands of passengers stranded at Bali's international airport have started to fly out after a change in wind direction blew volcanic ash from Mount Agung away. The volcano has been increasingly active in the past week, and scientists say the threat of a major eruption hasn't ended. About 100,000 people living in the danger zone have been told to move to emergency centres. Here is Step Varsen with more.
I'm here in one of the largest evacuation shelters near Mount Agung in Bali. This is basically the safe zone, but still near enough to the volcano for people to come here and spend the night. As you can see, there's around a few hundred people here, but only half of all the people in the danger zone have actually registered at these shelters, which means that thousands of people are still actually in the danger zone risking their lives. It has been a very big challenge for the government to persuade people to come down, because this situation has been going on for 2 months already. Back then, 2 months ago, I spoke with the family here of Nenga Saba, who actually survived the 1963 eruption. She told me back then that 4 people in her family had died. 500 people in the whole village, which was completely destroyed by the eruption at that time, died. Panyoman here is her son-in-law, and he actually still goes back and forth to the village, which is very near to the crater. And he told me there is what he called fire rain coming from that volcano right now. Bapak cerita ada hujan api kan? Ya. Bapak bisa menjelaskan hujan api apa itu? Ya.
It's a very dangerous situation. When I went back to the village in the morning, I could see ash spewing out, and I felt my body stinging. My mother told me that that's fire rain, which are fragments from the crater, and a sign a big eruption could happen.
But it has been quite difficult for the government to persuade people to come down and to explain to everyone that it is very dangerous and very deadly, because Mount Agung is a very unpredictable volcano. And although the warning system is in place, all the equipment has been in place, it's very difficult to persuade people to spend their lives like this for days, for weeks, and even months in a row.
A high-profile TV host in the US, fired by NBC, has apologized to anyone hurt by his actions. Veteran breakfast host Matt Lauer was let go for sexual harassment. He is the latest in a growing list of high-profile men in media, entertainment and politics to lose their jobs over harassment accusations. Lauer has issued a statement in which he says, partly, "Some of what is being said about me is untrue or mischaracterized, but there is enough truth in these stories to make me feel embarrassed or ashamed." Customs officers in China have seized their biggest haul of scales from the most hunted animal in the world. Nearly 12 tons of pangolin scales were found on a ship in Shenzhen. It is believed they came from at least 20,000 of the endangered animals. Pangolins are found only in Africa and Asia, and their scales are highly prized in traditional Chinese medicine. So let's take you through the headlines on Al Jazeera. There are tensions between the US and the UK as the British Prime Minister Theresa May again condemns President Donald Trump for retweeting anti-Muslim videos. Trump responded to May by telling her to focus on, quote, destructive radical Islamic terrorism, though May insists she is fully focused on tackling extremism.
British Muslims are peaceful and law-abiding people who have themselves been the subject of acts and the victims of acts of terror by the far right. There are those who conduct acts of terror in the name of Islam, but it is not in the name of Islam. And as Prime Minister, I am very clear about the priority that I give to dealing with the challenge of the threat of terrorism, and that's dealing with the threat of terrorism and extremism from whatever source they come.
Pope Francis has called on the international community to take decisive measures to resolve the refugee crisis in Bangladesh and Myanmar. However, he did not use the word Rohingya. The pontiff instead referred to the refugees from Rakhine State during his address in Dhaka. The US is calling for more sanctions and the complete isolation of North Korea. The UN Security Council also held an emergency meeting following Pyongyang's latest missile test. North Korea says the launch proves it has the capability to hit the US mainland. Medical sources say at least 10 people have been killed in fighting in Yemen's capital, Sana'a. Forces loyal to the former president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, fought with Houthi rebels near the Al-Saleh Mosque. The Saleh loyalists accuse the Houthis of committing a coup. The groups do have a loose alliance. Syria's opposition is meeting the UN mediator Staffan de Mistura in Geneva, the 8th round of UN-sponsored talks to end the civil war, which began almost 7 years ago. And Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani has received an invitation to attend next month's Gulf Cooperation Council summit in Kuwait. There had been doubts about whether that GCC meeting would go ahead, but Kuwait has confirmed it will. The Kuwaiti Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Jabir Al Sabah is the one who sent the invitation. Newsgrid coming up in 25 minutes' time here on Al Jazeera. Right now, though, the stream.